welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unravel a seriously mind-bending geopolitical chess game that is playing out right now on the global stage. We're also going to catch you up on the rapidly shifting borders and policies that are literally reshaping our world as we speak. From the depths of the Black Sea all the way to the ballot boxes of Central Europe, the strategies of nations are evolving, well, faster than ever.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First up, we're looking at a Black Sea mystery. We're calling it the Novorossiysk oil paradox. Next, Ukraine's new strategic pivot, followed by Europe's shifting border dynamics and Germany's historic political shift. Finally, we'll wrap things up with a rapid-fire look at some absolutely vital global flashpoints.
All right, Section 1, the Novorossiysk oil paradox.
So, to really wrap our heads around this, we need to talk about Novorossiysk. This coastal city sits about 300 kilometers from the front line, and it is absolutely crucial because it's Russia's most important remaining naval base in the Black Sea. And recently, it became the target of a massive operation. Just look at this number, 502. That's the sheer number of drones the Russian Defense Ministry claims they downed during this huge overnight strike on the Krasnodar region. These strikes damaged 4 industrial facilities, completely cut off local water supplies, and, tragically, left 3 people dead. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky actually characterized this as a unique operation. He pointed out that they were targeting what he called the last major stronghold of the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. And the momentum here is undeniable. Since late June, Ukraine has managed to strike nearly 200 Russian vessels. They've been executing these attacks with mind-boggling precision, specifically zeroing in on military positions, piers, and seaport infrastructure.
But right here is where we hit our mystery for today. You see, the port of Novorossiysk is what we call a dual-use facility. Yes, it's a military hub, for sure, but it is also one of Russia's biggest oil export hubs. And yet, despite hitting those military targets practically flawlessly, Ukraine was reportedly asked by Washington to essentially draw a red line and intentionally avoid striking the nearby Caspian Pipeline Consortium, or CPC, oil export infrastructure. I mean, think about that for a second. Why on earth would the U.S. ask Ukraine to spare the enemy's oil facilities?
Well, the answer lies in what exactly is flowing through those pipes. If you look at the breakdown, a whopping 90% of the oil in that CPC pipeline isn't even Russian. It's actually from Kazakhstan. And to add another layer to this, American multinationals, we're talking giants like Chevron and ExxonMobil, have major stakes in the fields producing that oil. If Ukraine were to destroy this export hub, it would severely squeeze the global oil supply, and that would drive international gas prices right up. The wild irony here? Higher global oil prices would actually end up benefiting Russia, all while punishing everyday consumers around the world.
Which brings us to Section 2, Ukraine's new strategic pivot. Faced with this super complex economic reality, Ukraine realized they had to completely change their targets. Attacking crude export infrastructure was off the table. It just risked too many global price spikes. So what did they do? They pivoted. Their new strategy is all about attacking domestic refineries and refined products inside Russia. And this brilliantly illustrates how you can cripple an adversary's internal supply. By taking out the actual facilities that turn raw crude into usable gasoline and diesel, Ukraine creates these immediate, crippling fuel shortages for both the Russian domestic market and their military without actually pulling raw crude off the global market.
And honestly, the success of this strategy is pretty staggering. Let's look at the numbers from energy economist Christoph Ruhl. Before this pivot, the ratio of crude to refined products Russia was exporting sat at about 1.5 to 1. Now, it has absolutely skyrocketed to 4 to 1. Think about what that means. Russia is literally being forced to export significantly more of its unrefined crude oil simply because their domestic refineries are too damaged to process it. They're even having to export refined products just to keep the lines at their own gas stations from getting too long. It is a highly effective, homemade strategy.
So the big takeaway here is that this all boils down to a highly transactional geopolitical trade-off. Back in July, strikes temporarily knocked about 400,000 barrels of CPC crude per day right out of the market. But by agreeing to spare the port's export facilities now, the global oil supply avoids a massive price spike. And in return, Ukraine drastically strengthens its negotiating position with the U.S. Right now, U.S. negotiators are actively discussing providing Ukraine with the Patriot interceptor missiles they so desperately need to protect their home front. All of this alongside potential new U.S. sanctions to dial up the pressure on Moscow.
All right, let's shift gears. Section 3, Europe's shifting border dynamics. Over on Europe's eastern flank, borders and political realities are going through some rapid and honestly quite literal underground transformations. Get this. The Selene Border Guard unit over in southeastern Latvia recently stumbled upon a group of 15 migrants who were completely covered in dirt. Why? Because they had actually attempted to enter the country through a secret underground tunnel dug all the way from Belarus. As Poland and Lithuania have heavily cracked down on illegal land crossings, building new fences and infrastructure over the past couple of years, migrants and the networks facilitating them are getting incredibly creative, resorting to these really dangerous subterranean tactics.
And the scale of this whole situation is just immense. In 2026 alone, Latvia has detained 9,000 irregular migrants. The European Union has formally stepped in, accusing Belarus of actively facilitating these crossings as a hybrid threat. So how is Latvia responding to this immense pressure? Well, they've temporarily closed border checkpoints with Belarus and launched something called Operation Werewolf. This operation runs straight through August and essentially mobilizes every single element of the Latvian security apparatus and armed forces to aggressively protect the frontier and mitigate these disturbances.
Meanwhile, as tensions along that Belarusian border continue to escalate, the Belarusian opposition in exile is mourning a really massive loss. Alexander Milinkovic, who was a very prominent pro-democracy activist and the unified opposition candidate in the 2006 presidential election, has sadly passed away at age 79 in Warsaw. A physicist by training, and actually a winner of the European Parliament's Sakharov Prize, he had been living in exile in Poland since 2021 after the brutal suppression of anti-government protests back home. Sviatlana Tikhonovskaya, the current opposition leader, honored him as a man of exceptional dignity, a kind soul, and a brilliant mind.
Moving further west now, Section 4, Germany's historic political shift.
Migration and internal politics are causing some historic ripples in Germany right now. Let's look at this number, 42%. That figure is currently sending absolute shockwaves through the German political establishment right ahead of some incredibly critical regional elections this September. According to the absolute latest opinion polls, the Nationalist Alternative for Germany Party, commonly known as the AfD, could score a historic 42% of the vote in the upcoming Saxony-Anhalt regional election. Driven in large part by a very strong stance on immigration, this polling puts them vastly ahead of other parties and really opens the door to potential governmental positions if they're able to form a coalition.
Now, what has academia, and certainly neighboring countries like Poland, paying extremely close attention are the AfD's proposed educational changes. The party is arguing that German universities have become too permeated with political agendas. If we look at their proposed curriculum changes, they include significantly reducing funding for gender and post-colonial studies, and in the history department, they are proposing a complete rethinking of German historical policy. That actually includes ideas like scrapping mandatory school visits to concentration camps, arguing for less focus on the country's Nazi past. It's a fundamental shift in political culture, and it's one that the entire region is watching very, very closely.
Let's bring it home. Section 5, Global Flashpoints and Updates.
First up in our rapid-fire roundup, we have a massive historical milestone over in Turkey. After a brutal 40-year conflict with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, that has tragically claimed up to 40,000 lives since it began in 1984, the Turkish parliament just passed a landmark law. This new framework provides a conditional pardon for thousands of militants, paving the way for the suspension of prison sentences and allowing for societal reintegration. This actually follows a call to disband made by the jailed PKK leader last year. Now, as you might expect, public reaction is very polarized. While some citizens are welcoming this as a long overdue step toward peace, others remain vehemently opposed to the idea of reintegrating former militants. Next, we turn to some really tragic news out of South America. 250 is the currently confirmed death toll following a devastating 7.4 magnitude earthquake that struck western Colombia on Monday. The aftermath here is just heartbreaking. Authorities on the ground are already describing this as the most devastating disaster to strike the country this entire century. There are still hundreds of people missing as rescue teams race against the clock. A state of national emergency has been officially declared. To put the devastation into perspective, roughly 8,000 buildings have been damaged and over 1,000 are completely destroyed. Essential services like power grids and even traffic signals remain completely offline in many of the rural areas around Cali. Before we wrap things up today, let's take a quick palate cleanser with some sports highlights from Birmingham. At the 2026 European Athletics Championships, Polish athletes Pia Skrzyszowa and Ewa Swoboda both secured incredibly impressive silver medals. Skrzyszowa actually missed out on gold in the 100-meter hurdles by just a single agonizing millisecond. But that silver brings her career total to an incredible 4 European Championship medals.
And Swoboda, who took home the silver in the 100-meter sprint, had this incredibly uplifting reflection on her mental and physical preparation. She said, "Once I stepped over the finish line, I was just happy to be on the podium again." Honestly, it's a wonderful reminder of the resilience required to just leave past mistakes in the rearview mirror and focus on the sheer joy of competing at the highest possible level.
From athletes adapting on the track to entire nations pivoting on the battlefield, today's stories really show us a world in profound transition. Which brings us to our final thought. Whether it's Ukraine strategically sparing oil pipelines in exchange for Patriot missiles, or European nations physically fortifying their borders while managing these massive internal political shifts, are we officially entering a new era of purely transactional geopolitics? It's a fascinating question, and one that will likely define the entire next decade. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.